Today we're tackling one of the most pervasive tropes in all of prepping. Are bunkers actually useful in an emergency situation? And if so, when are they useful, and when will they end up being your tomb? Let's get after it. I'm James Merritt, Emergency Manager and Career Soldier, and this is Readiness Nation. So today we need to talk about the actual utility of bunkers, because they are useful under some specific cases, but a lot of guys are treating them like a magical cure-all that will protect you from everything. So first we need to start with defining types of bunkers. The term bunker is one of those terms that started to be used interchangeably to mean several different things. This isn't the fault of uninformed users, it's actually the fault of the lack of specificity in the definition of the word itself. By definition, any reinforced underground shelter is a bunker. In military usage, we use the term to refer to anything from an improved fighting position with overhead cover, as noted in the Knockout a Bunker battle drill. But we also use it to refer to extensively developed underground command posts, such as the bunker under the Greenbrier Hotel, that was once used to shelter a command post for the Continuity of Government program during the Cold War. The applicable doctrine on emergency shelters doesn't make a salient distinction for the type of shelters we're discussing. Instead, the applicable doctrine focuses on sea-burn shelters for large groups of people, not individuals and families. At the family level, it focuses solely on storm shelters. As such, I've categorized the applicable protective structures to help facilitate your understanding, planning process, and communication with others. All of the defensive construction that's commonly referred to as a bunker can be broken down into three distinct categories. What I've dubbed Type A shelters includes panic rooms and storm shelters, which are characteristically defined as shelters that may be above or below ground, do not have air filtration systems, and are only ballistically rated to resist wind and debris from storms and/or penetration efforts from small arms and hand tools. Type B shelters include bomb shelters and fallout shelters, which are characteristically defined as shelters that are below ground and are ballistically rated to resist the kinetic force, overpressure, and thermal energy of major explosive devices that may include nuclear blasts. The principal difference between a bomb shelter and a fallout shelter is an airtight seal and an air filtration system capable of filtering out seaborne contaminants. Now, at this point, you may be asking, but what if I put a seal and a filtration system on a Type A shelter? What is it then? The answer is, it's a bad idea then. Remember, the primary difference between a Type A shelter and a Type B shelter is their level of ballistic protection. So if you're concerned enough about a nuclear explosion to want a filtration system on your Type A shelter, you should just get a Type B shelter. You can't be sure where the nuclear device will be detonated. And even if you template it over the nearest city center, you don't know if it'll be ground burst or air burst, the tonnage of the device, or if the warhead will be MIRVed. As such, you can't be certain you'll be outside of all the concentric rings of destruction, and that all you'll need to worry about is the fallout. Simply put, if you're planning for nukes, plan for nukes. Don't half-ass it. Furthermore, if you didn't understand any of that nuclear weapons jargon I just used, don't worry. They're all just considerations for templating a nuclear incident. And that's not something you'll need to bother with. If you're concerned about nuclear attack, you'll just need to get a Type B shelter that's rated to protect you against nuclear weapons. But bear in mind, all of these shelters still need to be some distance from ground zero to be effective. Now, if your analysis determines that there's little risk of conventional or nuclear bombardment, but there is significant risk of chemical or biological threats, then a sealed Type A shelter with a filtration system would be effective. However, if this is the result of your analysis and you can afford a Type B shelter, you're still probably best served to procure a Type B shelter. You never can truly rule out nuclear war as a possible threat. The final category is Type C shelters, which are all of those massive underground complexes often built from decommissioned missile silos or other decommissioned military facilities and have been repurposed for civilian use as survival shelters. These come in several different varieties with different levels of survival capabilities. They're generally designed for long-term occupancy, 1 year plus, but are still not a long-term, 20-year plus living solution. Now, there's a brand of prepper out there that's absolutely obsessed with bunkers as a catch-all solution to every possible problem. But in truth, bunkers legitimately have a very limited short-term use case. What bunkers are, if constructed correctly, is a very effective short-term method to shelter against conventional and seaborne bombardment, as well as non-tropical storms. What they're not is an effective long-term living solution, and especially not an effective way to hide from a tyrannical government. But don't get me wrong, I'm not saying bunkers are worthless, nor am I saying you shouldn't get one, or that you wasted your money if you already have one. However, you do need to understand what bunkers will actually be effective for and plan accordingly, or your bunker will end up being your tomb. But like I said, if you're concerned about your area being bombarded with conventional munitions from enemy aircraft, cruise missiles, naval guns, or artillery, then a properly designed and constructed Type B shelter is actually your best course of action. The same holds true if you're concerned about enemy seaborne attacks via enemy aircraft, naval-based cruise missiles, or intercontinental ballistic missiles. However, nuclear terrorism, or even conventional terrorist bombing for that matter, will not have enough warning for you to occupy your Type B shelter before you'll be impacted by their effects. However, if you survive the initial blast of nuclear terrorism, a properly constructed, filtered, and stocked Type B shelter will be the best place for you to wait for the fallout to go through its decay cycle until it's down to safe levels. And because Type B shelters are below ground, they're very effective storm shelters against non-tropical storms. But this is only for non-tropical storms, because whereas the bunker will protect you from the wind and debris from tropical storms, it will not protect you from all the displaced water that's characteristic of hurricanes and typhoons. So if you have to contend with tropical storms, an above-ground Type A shelter is probably going to be your best bet if you intend on sheltering in place. Furthermore, flash flooding can be generated by any severe wind event. So make sure to assess your risk of flooding at any location where you're considering a Type A or Type B shelter. The FEMA publication, Taking Shelter from the Storm, provides more technical guidance on this. Furthermore, Type B shelters are not at all effective when contending with mudslides or earthquakes. With mudslides, your air intake could get filled with mud, cutting off your oxygen supply. And your exit could get filled or covered with literal tons of earth, trapping you inside. Additionally, the rubble and debris from collapsing buildings during an earthquake could block your exits, trapping you inside your bunker. And finally, Type A and Type B shelters are not at all effective at protecting you against wildfires. This is due to the fact that even if your air intake isn't destroyed by the superheated air it's taking in, it'll still be pumping your bunker full of air that's hundreds of degrees, turning your bunker into a convection oven and cooking you alive. Another consideration you need to make with bunkers, and a lot of people learned this the hard way during COVID, is that cramming people, even loved ones, into a confined space will drive them insane. Now, think about your family in a space 1/4 or less of the size of your house and underground, so there aren't even windows to look out or natural sunlight coming in. But even if you have enough space to not literally go insane or spread disease, and you have a good enough sanitation plan to not spread disease, you'll still need to come out after your food runs out, even if that is after 5 years in a Type C shelter. And as discussed in my video, How Long Do You Really Need to Prepare for an Emergency, your only real long-term food solution is becoming a subsistence agriculturalist. So your bunker, regardless of type, isn't going to help once you emerge if your agricultural land has been seized by force, or your farmhouse and/or agricultural equipment have been destroyed or stolen. Which leads to my next point. Bunkers are a terrible choice when trying to defend against people. Unless you have some sort of automated turret gun system, you have no external combat power when holed up in a bunker. And as such, you're completely vulnerable to what anyone is doing on the surface. Now, I'm not going to get into the finer points of bunker shucking, as I am not at all interested in teaching people to become raiders. But every Type A and Type B shelter design that I've looked at is vulnerable to being found and breached with tools and equipment that are available on the civilian market. Type A's and Type B's are only effective against assailants attempting to breach them when law enforcement is on the way and the assailant has limited time to make entry. But as such, all Type A and Type B shelters with sufficiently sturdy locking mechanisms are, however, effective as panic rooms. Type C shelters are generally built with countermeasures against intrusion. In instances of Type Cs built from old missile silos, they have very thick doors that would take heavy construction equipment, military breaching equipment, or an excessive application of high explosives to breach. It takes military or paramilitary capabilities to breach a Type C shelter, but it most certainly can be done. Which leads me to my final point. I hear tell there's a particular brand of prepper that wants a bunker to hide out from the government if it turns tyrannical. This will be absolutely and completely ineffective. You can really only attempt such a thing with a hidden Type B shelter. And if you're on the run from the government or planning on running off to your bunker, the first thing the government would do is search all of the land holdings registered to you and search that land. If they didn't find you, they would repeat this process with all of your next of kin and known associates. So they will find the parcel of land where your bunker is buried. There's no way to own or lease land in the US without leaving a paper trail, even if it's somebody else's paper trail. As for the search of the grounds itself, the government has thermal imaging that can undoubtedly see the exhaust that'll be coming out of your bunker once occupied and operational. If your bunker isn't buried deep enough, they'll be able to see the temperature difference between your bunker and the surrounding earth. And even if you did effectively mask your heat signature, the government has ground-penetrating radar that will not only identify where your bunker is, it'll show the dimensions of your bunker. From there, all it would take is placing a cratering charge on the surface over the center of your bunker, and that's all she wrote. Remember, in this scenario, the government has turned tyrannical, so search warrants and civil rights aren't a thing anymore. And to add insult to injury, the whole search process I outlined can be done with drones now. But like I said, bunkers aren't a bad idea, just understand what they're actually used for and don't engage in wishful thinking giving bunkers magical properties. It won't end well for you. Also, it should go without saying that you can't just throw dirt on top of a metal shipping container and call it a bunker. Make sure all bunkers are built and certified by credentialed professionals. But that's going to be it for me. So if you found this information useful, give me the old controlled pair on the like and subscribe buttons. And if you found this information useful enough that you want to buy me a beer about it, there's a link to my Patreon and Subscribe Star in the description. So until next time, this is James Merritt for Readiness Nation, reminding you to always be the master of your fate and the captain of your soul.